Emma Carter had spent years learning how to survive pressure. At 28, she was a respected officer in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Liberty, where discipline shaped every hour of her day. She woke before sunrise, trained in rain or heat, managed logistics for hundreds of soldiers, and made decisions that could affect missions across continents. People who worked with her said she was the kind of officer who never lost composure. She gave orders clearly, solved problems quickly, and kept her emotions locked behind a calm face. Most believed nothing could shake her. That was before marriage taught her that some battles had no clear enemy. Emma met Daniel Brooks during a joint systems training seminar hosted near the base. Daniel was not military. He worked for Lockheed Martin as a civilian communications contractor. He had been invited to teach a software upgrade being rolled out across several installations. Emma attended because part of her role involved coordinating equipment transfers. She expected another boring briefing. Instead, she noticed him the moment he walked into the room. Daniel had an easy smile that made even formal introductions feel personal. He wasn't loud, but people listened when he spoke. During a break, Emma stood by the coffee station checking messages from her commanding officer when Daniel stepped beside her and casually said, "You look like you're trying to solve a war before lunch." Emma looked up surprised, then laughed. That one sentence started everything. They talked for 15 minutes that day, then 30 the next. By the end of the seminar, Daniel knew she hated sweet coffee, loved thunderstorms, and secretly listened to old country songs during long drives. Emma knew he'd grown up in Nashville, lost his father young, and had a habit of making jokes when he was nervous. When he asked for her number, she hesitated only long enough to pretend she was thinking. Their first few months felt effortless. Daniel understood the military schedule better than most civilians because his work often put him around bases. He didn't complain when Emma had to cancel plans because of surprise duties. He'd leave food in her fridge when she came home late. He remembered small things, how she liked extra blankets, how she hated driving in heavy rain, how she always forgot to eat when stressed. For someone who lived in constant motion, Daniel felt like stillness. The relationship moved fast, but not in a reckless way. More like two people who had spent years building separate lives and suddenly realized those lives fit together naturally. They took weekend trips to Charlotte, cooked terrible pasta together, and stayed up until 2 a.m. talking about childhood memories. Emma told him things she had never shared with anyone outside the Army, how lonely deployments could feel even surrounded by people, how she sometimes feared becoming too hardened to have a normal life. Daniel listened, really listened. That was what made her trust him. A year later, they married in a small ceremony near the base. Nothing extravagant. A few military friends, Daniel's family, and Emma's younger sister. She wore a simple dress instead of uniform formal wear because Daniel said he wanted the day to belong to Emma, not the Army. She cried during the vows. Not because she was uncertain, but because she had never felt so sure. Their first apartment sat in a quiet neighborhood 15 minutes from Fort Liberty. It was modest, white walls, a small kitchen, and a narrow backyard Daniel insisted would one day have a garden. Emma liked how ordinary it felt. She had spent years in barracks, temporary housing, and deployment tents. This house represented permanence. The first 6 months were everything she imagined marriage should be. They argued over harmless things, what movie to watch, whose turn it was to buy detergent, but always ended up laughing. Daniel waited for her when she worked late. Emma learned to leave military stress at the door. They planned vacations, talked about kids, chose paint colors for rooms they might renovate. Friends envied them. Captain Laura Bennett once told Emma during lunch, "I've never seen you smile this much. It's weird." Emma grinned, "Maybe I was always happy." Laura smirked, "No, you definitely were." Emma laughed, but later that evening, while Daniel chopped vegetables in their kitchen, she realized Laura was right. Marriage had softened something inside her. But soft things bruise easily. The first crack was so small she nearly missed it. One Thursday night, Emma texted Daniel that she'd be late. An emergency inventory issue had kept her on base. She arrived home at 10:45 p.m., exhausted, expecting the usual, Daniel waiting with reheated food and a teasing comment about military chaos. Instead, the kitchen was dark. Daniel sat in the living room, television on mute. Emma placed her bag down. "Hey, sorry it ran late." He didn't look at her immediately. "You said 7. She unbuttoned her jacket. "I know it changed." He shrugged. "You could have called." "I texted." "That's not the same." She stared at him. It wasn't a fight, not really, just a sharper tone than usual. She apologized, showered, and ate alone while he stayed in the living room. The next morning, he kissed her goodbye like nothing happened. She forgot about it. Until it happened again. And again. A missed dinner, a canceled weekend trip, a phone call interrupted because Emma had to return to base. Daniel never exploded. He simply grew colder for a few hours. His voice became shorter. His smile faded. He'd say "it's fine" in a way that meant the opposite. Emma noticed, but convinced herself it was adjustment. Then one Sunday, it turned into something else. She had promised Daniel they'd spend the day together. No calls, no uniform, no work. They planned to drive to a lake outside the city. At 8:12 a.m., her phone rang. "Duty officer." A supply issue involving a classified transport. She had to report immediately. Emma looked at Daniel across the breakfast table. He already knew. His jaw tightened. "You said today was ours." She hated that sentence because he was right. She stood and reached for his hand. "I know, I'll make it up." He pulled his hand back. The movement was subtle, but it hit harder than shouting. Emma left anyway. Military duty didn't ask permission. She returned that evening after sunset. Daniel was sitting on the back porch, beer in hand, staring into the yard. Emma sat beside him. "I'm sorry." He nodded without looking at her. She waited. Finally he said, "Do you ever think about how often your life belongs to everyone except me?" Emma blinked. "That's not fair." "It's true. I don't choose emergencies. You chose this career." The words landed like a slap. She stood. "You knew what my job was when we got married." Daniel laughed bitterly. "I knew your job. I didn't know it would always come first." Emma walked inside before she said something worse. That night they slept facing opposite walls. By morning they apologized. But the argument stayed. It returned in new forms. At dinner, Daniel would mention how another husband in the neighborhood managed to attend family events. Emma would snap that comparing marriages was ridiculous. Daniel would go silent. Emma would feel guilty. Then they'd act normal. The cycle repeated. Slowly, their conversations changed. At first they shared detail, then summaries, then logistics. "What time will you be home? Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up milk? I'm tired. We'll talk later." Later never came. Emma tried to fix it. She took leave for 4 days, planned a trip to a cabin near the mountains. She imagined quiet mornings and reconnection. The first day was perfect. They hiked, laughed, and made breakfast together. Daniel wrapped his arms around her by the fireplace and said, "I miss this version of us." Emma smiled, relieved. "Then we keep it." He kissed her forehead. That night they sat outside under a cold sky, sharing a blanket. It should have healed everything. Instead, it exposed what was underneath. Daniel had been drinking just enough to stop filtering his thoughts. He asked suddenly, "Do you ever regret marrying me?" Emma turned sharply. "What?" He stared at the fire. "You seem happier at work than here." She frowned. That's not true. You laugh with soldiers. You answer every call. You come home and look like you're counting minutes until sleep. Emma's voice hardened. Because work drains me. No, he said quietly. I think I drain you. Silence stretched. Emma could have denied it. But she hesitated. That hesitation changed his face. Daniel looked at her like he had heard an answer she never spoke. He stood, walked inside, and didn't come out again. The rest of the trip felt staged, smiles without meaning, touch without comfort. When they returned home, the house felt different. Not because anything changed physically. Because both now knew something they hadn't said aloud. Their marriage was no longer easy, and neither knew how to repair what had begun breaking. Weeks passed. Arguments grew stranger. Not louder, worse. Daniel started bringing up things from months earlier. Emma started keeping mental lists of his complaints. They interrupted each other, misunderstood each other, assumed motives. One night, Emma forgot to buy groceries. Daniel came home, saw the empty fridge and muttered figures. Emma heard it. She dropped her keys. Excuse me. He opened a cabinet. Nothing. No, say it. He turned. You forgot again. I worked 14 hours. And I worked too. She stared at him, then by them. His laugh was sharp. That's your answer. Her voice rose. What do you want from me? Daniel stepped closer. A wife who's actually here. The room went still. Emma's training had taught her to stay calm when yelled at, but those words came from the one person she had trusted with everything. She whispered, "Don't say that again." Daniel's expression changed. Regret appeared immediately. But pride is cruel. Instead of apologizing, he said, "Then prove me wrong." Emma walked upstairs. She locked the bedroom door. Daniel slept on the couch. The next day he left flowers. She accepted them. But acceptance wasn't forgiveness. The real damage was invisible. Emma began staying later at base, even when she didn't need to. She told herself it was workload. In truth, she dreaded walking into tension. At work she remained perfect, efficient, focused, strong. At home she became quiet. One evening Captain Laura watched Emma reviewing reports and said, "You've been here 3 extra hours every day this week." Emma didn't look up. Busy. Laura crossed her arms. "You're hiding." Emma stopped typing. Laura lowered her voice. "From what?" Emma wanted to say nothing. Instead, she surprised herself. She said, "Home." Laura said nothing for a long time. Then simply, "That's bad." Emma laughed without humor. "Yeah." She drove home that night under heavy rain, windshield blurred, hands tight on the steering wheel. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw the porch light off. Daniel usually left it on. Inside, the house was dark. She called his name. No answer. Then she noticed the kitchen table. A single note. Her pulse jumped. She walked closer. It was only 4 words, written in Daniel's handwriting. "At my brother's, need space." Emma read it twice. She stood there in her wet uniform, rainwater still on her sleeves, and felt something she had not felt in years. Fear. Not the fear of danger. The fear that love could leave quietly, one ordinary evening without warning. She sat at the kitchen table for over an hour, staring at that note. Her phone remained beside her. No message, no call. For the first time since their wedding, she didn't know whether Daniel would come back tomorrow, or whether this was the beginning of something neither of them could stop. And for the first time, Emma Carter, the woman trained to hold the line under pressure, realized she might be losing a battle no rank could help her win. Emma barely slept. The note stayed on the kitchen table all night, and somehow that made it worse. If Daniel had shouted, slammed the door, or sent a long, angry text, at least there would have been something to respond to. But 4 words at my brother's, need space, left her alone with too many possibilities. She lay awake staring at the ceiling until dawn painted pale gray lines across the bedroom walls. Daniel's side of the bed remained untouched, the pillow still shaped the way he had left it. Emma reached for her phone 3 separate times. She typed, "Are you okay?" Then erased it. She typed, "Come home so we can talk." Deleted that too. Pride was an ugly thing. It could make 2 people who loved each other act like strangers. At 5:15 a.m., her alarm rang. She got dressed in silence, pulled her uniform jacket on, and drove to Fort Liberty before sunrise. No one on base noticed anything unusual. That almost angered her. Soldiers saluted, staff brought paperwork, radios crackled, orders moved through the operations room exactly as they always did. Emma answered every question, signed every form, and coordinated equipment transfers without missing a detail. Her voice remained calm. Her posture stayed perfect. Inside, she was somewhere else. At 9:20 a.m., Captain Laura Bennett stepped into her office and immediately closed the door behind her. Laura crossed her arms. "You look awful." Emma didn't look up. "Good morning to you too." "I'm serious." Emma kept reading a file she wasn't actually processing. "I'm fine." Laura waited. Then she said quietly, "Did he leave?" Emma's hand froze on the page. That was enough answer. Laura exhaled slowly and sat in the chair opposite her desk. "What happened?" Emma wanted to say nothing, but that would be a lie. She set the file down. "He went to his brother, said he needed space." Laura tilted her head. "Do you think he's ending it?" The question felt like someone pressing on a bruise. Emma stared out the office window toward the training field. "I don't know." Laura studied her. "Call him." Emma shook her head immediately. "No." "Why?" "Because he left." Laura leaned back. "So?" Emma's jaw tightened. "If he wants space, he can have it." Laura gave her a look that only old friends could give, the kind that says you're being stubborn, and you know it. But she didn't argue. She stood. "Don't make silence into a contest. Nobody wins those." After she left, Emma sat alone for several minutes. Then she picked up her phone. She stared at Daniel's contact photo. It was from 6 months earlier during a weekend at the lake. He was smiling, sunlight hitting one side of his face, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She locked the screen instead. That evening, she came home to the same empty house. Daniel's shoes were gone from the entryway. His laptop was missing. The charger from his side of the bed had disappeared too. None of it was dramatic. He had taken practical things, but practical things made absence feel real. Emma stood in the kitchen and opened the fridge. A container of pasta Daniel had cooked 2 nights earlier was still there. He always made too much. She stared at it, then shut the door and walked upstairs. She didn't cry. That almost bothered her more than if she had. Because part of her was angry. Not just hurt, angry. He had left without talking, left a note like she was a roommate, left her to sit alone in a house they chose together. By the 3rd day, anger became her shield. She stopped checking her phone every 10 minutes. She stayed later on base. She ordered takeout and let dishes pile in the sink. She told herself if Daniel wanted to leave, then let him leave. But emotions are rarely honest. Late Thursday night, after a 14-hour shift, she unlocked the front door and heard the sound that stopped her cold. A cabinet closing. She reached for the sidearm in her holster by instinct. Then Daniel stepped into the hallway. He looked tired, same jeans he'd left in, hair slightly messy. He froze when he saw her hand near the weapon. "Emma." She dropped her hand immediately and exhaled sharply. You scared me. Daniel looked around awkwardly. I came for some things. The words were neutral. Too neutral. Emma set her bag down carefully. You could have texted. He nodded, yeah. Silence. The house suddenly felt too small. Daniel glanced toward the stairs. I didn't know when you'd be home. Emma wanted to ask 100 questions. How long are you staying there? Are we okay? Why didn't you call? Do you still love me? Instead, she asked the worst possible thing. Did you enjoy your break? Daniel looked at her for a second, surprised by the bitterness. Then he said quietly, I didn't leave for fun. Her throat tightened, but she didn't soften. He went upstairs. She stayed in the kitchen pretending to look at mail while listening to drawers open and close. 20 minutes later, he came down carrying a duffel bag. Emma finally said, so that's it. Daniel stopped. The air changed. He looked at her carefully, like he wasn't sure if the conversation would become a fight. What do you mean? Emma crossed her arms. You leave a note, disappear for 3 days, then come back for clothes. Daniel's expression hardened. You didn't call. The answer hit instantly. She stared at him. You're blaming me. No, he said, though his tone said otherwise. I'm saying you didn't call either. Emma laughed once, short and disbelieving. You walked out. And you let me. The words struck deeper than either expected. Emma's voice dropped. What was I supposed to do, chase you? Daniel stepped closer, not aggressive, just exhausted. I wanted you to care enough to stop me. That sentence cracked something open. Emma swallowed hard. I was angry. So was I. They stood there close enough to touch, separated by days of silence. Daniel looked away first. I'm staying at my brother's a little longer. Emma felt her chest tighten. She kept her face blank. For how long? He shook his head. I don't know. Then he left again. And this time she cried. Not loudly. She sat on the kitchen floor after the door shut and cried in complete silence, one hand over her mouth as if someone might hear. The next week became unbearable. Daniel texted occasionally, short, polite, almost formal. I'll come by Saturday for mail. Your package arrived. Can you send the insurance login? No mention of them. No mention of fixing anything. Emma responded just as coldly. She hated herself for matching his distance, but every message felt like a test she refused to fail. On Friday night, she drove to Daniel's brother's house. She didn't plan to. Her hands turned the steering wheel almost on their own after leaving base. She ended up parked 2 houses away, engine off, staring at the porch light. She saw Daniel through the front window. He was laughing. Laughing. Something inside her twisted so sharply she had to look away. She knew it was irrational. He was allowed to laugh, allowed to speak to his family, allowed to exist outside her pain. But seeing him look normal, while her world felt unstable, ignited something ugly. She drove home furious. When Daniel came by Saturday morning, she was waiting. He stepped inside and immediately sensed it. What happened? Emma shut the door behind him. Nothing. He gave a tired smile. That tone means definitely something. She crossed her arms. You seem fine. Daniel frowned. What? At your brother's last night. His face changed. You went there. Emma realized how it sounded too late. Daniel stared at her. You sat outside my brother's house. She snapped defensively. I was nearby. No, you were. The room sharpened. Emma felt embarrassment become anger. I wanted to talk. You watched me through a window. The way he said it made her feel ridiculous. She hated that. Her voice rose. I came because you won't talk to me. Daniel's jaw tightened. And that seemed normal to you. Emma stepped back like he had struck her. Not physically. Something in his tone. Like she had crossed into someone he didn't recognize. She whispered, "I miss my husband." Daniel's expression softened instantly. The fight vanished for one fragile second. He rubbed his forehead and sat down heavily on the couch. "So do I." That broke her. Emma sat opposite him, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Neither spoke for nearly a minute. Then Daniel said what he had been carrying for months. "I don't know how to be married to someone who's never really home." Emma looked at him. "That's not fair." He nodded. "Maybe not, but it's true for me." She inhaled sharply, but he continued. "When we met, I thought I understood your life. I told myself I could handle it, but everything is on your job's schedule. Holidays, plans, dinners, sleep. Every time something changes, I'm expected to understand." Emma felt defensive heat rising, but his voice remained calm. And calm made it harder to fight. Daniel looked at the floor. "I'm not mad that you serve. I'm proud of you. But sometimes I feel like I'm competing with an institution that always wins." Emma stared at him. No insults. No shouting. Just truth. And truth was harder to dismiss. She swallowed. "You think I choose any of that?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I think you're so used to sacrificing personal things that you stopped noticing what it costs us." The sentence hurt because some part of her feared it was real. She answered quietly, "Do you know what it costs me too?" Daniel looked up. Her voice cracked for the first time. "I spend all day making decisions that affect people. I carry things I can't even tell you. I walk into rooms where mistakes matter. Then I come home and the person I trust most acts like I failed because I missed dinner." Daniel flinched. Emma continued, years of restraint pouring out. "I'm tired too. I'm trying too. But every mistake becomes proof I'm a bad wife. Every delay becomes proof I don't care. I come home scared that one wrong sentence starts another fight." Daniel looked shaken. Because he hadn't known. Or maybe he hadn't wanted to. They sat there in silence, both suddenly seeing the other in ways they had ignored. Daniel spoke first. "I didn't know you were afraid to come home." Emma looked down. The fact that he knew now made it feel real. Daniel leaned forward. "Emma, I never wanted that." She nodded but didn't answer. Because intent didn't erase damage. He stayed 2 hours. They talked more honestly than they had in months. Not everything was solved, far from it. But something shifted. When he stood to leave, Emma walked him to the door. He hesitated, then said softly, "I'm not ready to come back yet." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to nod. He touched her hand briefly before stepping outside. That tiny touch stayed with her all night. For a few days, things improved. They texted more naturally, shared jokes, sent photos. He came over once for dinner and left after midnight. They watched an old movie and nearly felt normal. Emma let herself believe the worst had passed. Then came the phone call. 2 weeks later, she was in the middle of a logistics review on base when her commanding officer entered. His expression was serious. "Emergency reassignment. You're attached to a deployment rotation." Emma blinked. "Where?" He handed her sealed orders. Her stomach dropped. "Overseas. 6 months." She stared at the paper. Everything around her blurred. Daniel had just begun speaking to her again. The marriage was hanging by threads, and now the army was sending her away for half a year. She drove home in complete silence. Daniel was there, waiting for dinner. He smiled when she walked in. Then he saw her face. "What happened?" Emma set the orders on the table. He read them. His face changed as each line sank in. Finally, he looked up. Neither spoke. Then Daniel said the sentence that made Emma feel the ground disappear beneath her. "If you go now, I don't think we survive this." The room went silent. Emma stared at the man she loved. And for the first time in her life, duty and marriage stood directly in front of each other, and she knew choosing one might destroy the other. The sentence stayed in Emma's head all night. "If you go now, I don't think we survive this." Daniel hadn't yelled when he said it. That made it worse. His voice had been quiet, almost tired, as if he had already spent months fighting a battle he believed he was losing. Emma stood in their kitchen long after he left, the deployment orders still on the table, the paper creased where his hand had gripped it. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, and the house felt too silent for a place two people had once filled with laughter. She barely slept. At 4 a.m. she gave up and drove to Fort Liberty, arriving before the sky lightened. The base looked the same as always. Guards at the gate, headlights moving through the roads, soldiers jogging in formation. Routine had a cruel way of continuing even when someone's personal life felt like it was collapsing. Emma walked into her office, closed the door, and sat staring at the deployment orders. 6 months overseas. She had deployed before. She knew what it meant: long shifts, unpredictable communication, time zone gaps, and carrying responsibility under pressure. But this time the location didn't scare her. What scared her was coming home to nothing. At 7:10 a.m., Captain Laura Bennett knocked once and entered without waiting. Laura took one look at Emma's face and frowned. What happened? Emma slid the orders across the desk. Laura read them, then looked up. "That's fast." Emma nodded. Laura sat down. "When do you leave?" 3 weeks. Laura exhaled slowly. "And Daniel?" Emma gave a hollow laugh. "He says if I go, the marriage won't survive." Laura leaned back quiet. Then she asked carefully, "Is he asking you to stay?" Emma stared at the desk. "He didn't say the words." "But that's what he means." Emma didn't answer. Because yes, he meant it. And that was the impossible part. No one in the army asks whether you want to go. Orders arrive. You go. That's the commitment. Emma had accepted that years ago. But marriage had introduced something the army never accounted for. Someone waiting at home. Someone whose life changed with every assignment. Laura folded the paper. "What do you want?" Emma looked up sharply. The question irritated her instantly. "What kind of question is that?" "A normal one." "I don't have a choice." Laura held her gaze. "That's not what I asked." Emma looked away. Because she didn't know. That evening, Daniel came over after work. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Emma stepped aside and let him in. Neither mentioned the deployment at first. They ate in near silence. The clink of silverware against plates sounded louder than conversation. Finally, Daniel put his fork down. "Have you decided?" Emma looked at him. The words were simple, the weight was. She swallowed. "I don't get to decide." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You could request deferment." She blinked. "You looked into that?" "I asked someone." Emma sat back stunned. "You already made calls." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I'm trying to understand our options." The word "our" should have comforted her. Instead, it felt like pressure. She set her fork down carefully. "Daniel, deferment isn't simple. It affects assignments, records, everything." His voice sharpened. "So does divorce." The room froze. He seemed to realize what he'd said a second too late. Emma stared at him. He looked down, but he didn't take it back. The silence that followed felt like standing on ice, hearing the cracks beneath your feet. Emma spoke first, quietly. "Are you threatening me?" Daniel's eyes widened. "No." That sounded like one. He stood immediately. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I mean, I'm scared. We were barely speaking 2 weeks ago. I moved out. We're hanging on by a thread. And now you're leaving for 6 months like none of that matters. Emma stood too. It matters. Then act like it. She stared at him, chest rising faster. Daniel stepped closer. Emma, I'm not asking you to abandon who you are. I'm asking whether this marriage matters enough to fight for. Her eyes burned. Don't say I'm not fighting. He held her gaze. Then fight for us too. He left after that. And Emma did something she had not done since she was 19. She called her mother. Susan Carter answered on the second ring. Honey, is everything okay? Emma almost said yes. Instead, her voice broke. No. That one word opened everything. Her mother listened for nearly an hour. Emma spoke from her car parked outside the house, unable to sit inside with the walls closing in. She explained Daniel leaving, the fights, the deployment, the ultimatum without calling it one. When she finally stopped, Susan was quiet. Then she said something Emma didn't expect. You can love someone and still be hurting each other. Emma wiped at her face. I know. No, Susan said gently. I mean, sometimes love stays while compatibility disappears. Emma shut her eyes. She hated hearing that, because it sounded possible. The next week was unbearable. Daniel and Emma tried to talk like adults. That was somehow harder than arguing. They met for coffee after work, sat across from each other like strangers negotiating terms. Daniel asked whether she had requested deferment. Emma said no. He went quiet. She asked whether he was coming home. He said not yet. Every conversation ended politely. That politeness felt colder than anger. Then one Friday, everything broke open. Emma returned home early and found Daniel in the garage. He had come to collect more things. She saw 2 boxes by his car. Something inside her snapped. You're moving out completely. Daniel turned, startled. I'm taking some stuff. She laughed sharply. 2 boxes and your winter coat looks pretty permanent. He sighed. Emma, not now. The dismissal ignited her. No, you don't get to decide when. You disappear, come back when convenient, and now you're quietly moving out while pretending we're discussing options. Daniel straightened. I'm trying not to fight. She stepped forward, then stopped, leaving every time something gets hard. The words landed like a strike. Daniel's face changed. He spoke slowly, carefully. You think I left because one argument was hard? Emma crossed her arms. He shook his head in disbelief. I left because every conversation became me begging for space in your life. Her anger flared. That's not true. He laughed once, but there was no humor. Really? Tell me the last time you chose us over the army. The question hit like a direct shot. Emma froze. Because she had answers. But none came fast enough. Daniel saw that. And something in him gave way. He nodded once bitterly. That's what I thought. Emma's chest tightened. That's unfair. No, it's honest. Her voice rose. I built this life before you. And I married you, believing there was room for me in it. Silence slammed into the garage. Neither moved. Emma realized her hands were shaking. Daniel noticed too. His expression softened slightly. But then he said the sentence that changed everything. I don't know if I recognize who we are anymore. Emma stared at him. The world narrowed to those words. Not I'm angry, not I need time. He didn't know if he recognized their marriage. She turned and walked inside. He called her name. She didn't stop. Upstairs, she locked the bedroom door and sat on the floor, breathing hard, palms over her face. She heard the front door close an hour later. He left. This time, she didn't go after him. 2 days passed. No texts. No calls. Emma worked like someone trying to outrun thought. She volunteered for extra briefings, stayed late, reviewed reports that didn't need reviewing. Captain Laura watched her silently all afternoon Monday. Finally, she shut Emma's office door. Enough. Emma didn't look up, busy. Laura took the folder from her hands. Emma glared, "Give that back." Laura tossed it onto the desk. "You're hiding in work because your marriage is collapsing." The words struck cleanly. Emma stood, "Watch it." Laura didn't flinch. "No, you watch it. You're acting like staying late fixes anything." Emma's voice sharpened. "You don't understand." Laura stepped closer. "My husband left me 6 years ago because I was deployed too often." Emma stopped. She had never known. Laura's voice stayed calm. "I told myself he was selfish, that he knew what he signed up for, that my duty came first. You know what? I was right, and I still came home to an empty house." Emma stared at her. Laura's expression softened. "You can be right and still lose everything." Those words followed Emma all day. That night, she drove to Daniel's brother's house again. But this time she knocked. Daniel opened the door. He looked surprised, then immediately wary. Emma's voice was steady, but only barely. "We need to talk." He stepped outside. They stood under the porch light, while his brother stayed inside, pretending not to notice. Emma looked at him directly. "I requested deferment." Daniel blinked. The words seemed to take a second to register. "You did." She nodded. He stared. "Why?" That question angered her instantly. "Because I'm trying." His face changed. The tension in his shoulders eased for the first time in weeks. He stepped closer. "Emma." She held up a hand. "Don't, I need to say this." He went still. Emma's voice trembled despite her effort. "I don't know if it'll be approved, probably not, but I submitted it because I'm not pretending this is okay. I know we're breaking. I know I've been absent even when I'm physically there, and I know you've been hurting." Daniel said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on her. Emma swallowed hard. "But if you think making me choose between my marriage and the career I've built my whole life is sustainable, then we have a bigger problem." Daniel's face tightened. She continued before fear stopped her. "I will fight for us, but I won't erase myself to do it." Silence. A long one. Then Daniel stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. Emma froze. It had been weeks since he touched her like that. Not polite, not uncertain. Real. She exhaled into his shoulder and closed her eyes. For one moment, everything disappeared. The fights, the note, the deployment. It felt like finding oxygen after weeks underwater. Daniel whispered, "I don't want to lose you." Her voice broke. "Then stop leaving." He nodded against her hair. That night he came home. For the first time in over 2 weeks, Daniel slept in their bed. They lay facing each other in the dark, talking until after midnight. Childhood stories, old memories, nothing serious at first because seriousness had become dangerous. Then just before sleep, Daniel asked quietly, "Do you think we can actually fix this?" Emma answered honestly, "I don't know." But she reached for his hand. And he held it. The next morning felt almost normal. Coffee, shared jokes, Daniel leaving his mug in the sink the way she hated, Emma teasing him about it. She almost believed they had turned a corner. At 2:17 p.m. her phone rang. Command. Her deferment request had been reviewed. Denied. Immediate deployment remained in effect. No delay. No exceptions. Emma stood in the hallway outside operations, unable to breathe for several seconds. 3 weeks. That was all. She drove home with the rejection notice in her bag, every red light feeling endless. When she walked in, Daniel looked up from the couch and smiled. The smile disappeared the moment he saw her face. He stood slowly. Emma placed the paper on the table. He read it. Neither spoke. The silence stretched until it hurt. Then Daniel set the paper down and said, in a voice she had never heard from him before, "So you chose." Emma stared at him, stunned. The words were wrong. So wrong they didn't feel real. She whispered, "That's not what happened." Daniel looked at her. Pain had turned his face unfamiliar. He took one step back. Then said, "Maybe this marriage was already over. We were just too scared to say it." And when he walked upstairs to pack, Emma didn't follow, because for the first time, she was no longer sure whether stopping him would save anything at all. Daniel's words kept echoing through the house. Maybe this marriage was already over. We were just too scared to say it. Emma stood alone in the kitchen, hands flat on the table, staring at the rejected deferment paper like the ink might rearrange itself if she looked long enough. Upstairs, she could hear drawers opening, closet doors sliding, the quiet, practical sounds of someone deciding whether to stay married. She had faced live fire drills, emergency transport failures, and command reviews that could end careers. None of those had ever made her legs feel weak. She went upstairs. Daniel was folding shirts into a duffel bag. His face was blank in the way people look when they're trying not to feel anything at all. Emma stopped at the doorway. "Don't do this." He kept packing. She stepped inside. "Daniel, look at me." He did. His eyes were red, but his voice stayed steady. "I did look at you for months. Every time you said later, every time work came first, every time we said we'd talk and then didn't, I looked." Emma swallowed. "This wasn't my choice." He laughed once, tired, not cruel. "That's the problem. Nothing ever is. Your orders, your schedule, your calls, your emergencies. Everything just happens, and we're supposed to survive around it." She felt anger rise, then stop halfway because she recognized the hurt underneath it. She stepped closer. "I requested deferment." "I know. I tried." Daniel zipped the bag. "And it still ended here." The sentence landed between them like a final document signed by both parties. Emma stared at the duffel bag, then at him. And for the first time since they married, she said the thing she had been too proud to say. "I'm scared." Daniel froze. Not because the words were dramatic. Because they were so unlike her. Emma's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I'm scared that I leave and come back to divorce papers. I'm scared that I stay and hate you for asking. I'm scared that I've become someone who can command 100 soldiers and still fail the person I love most." Daniel's expression cracked. He sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. Emma stayed standing, arms folded tightly around herself as if holding her body together. After a long silence, Daniel said quietly, "Come here." She did. He pulled her down beside him, and for several minutes neither spoke. He just held her while the house stayed silent around them. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a solution. It was two people too tired to keep pretending they were okay. That night they didn't argue. They also didn't resolve anything. They ate takeout in front of the television without watching it. They sat close but didn't speak much. When they went to bed, Daniel stayed on his side, Emma on hers, the distance between them smaller than before but still there. 3 weeks passed quickly, which somehow made them feel unreal. They became careful with each other. Gentle almost. No shouting, no old fights, but not because things were fixed, because both knew time was running out. Daniel moved back fully. His shoes returned to the doorway. His toothbrush returned to the bathroom. He slept beside her every night. They went grocery shopping once and almost laughed like they used to when he bought the wrong cereal. Those moments hurt more than arguments, because they reminded Emma what they were losing. 2 days before deployment, Daniel came to the base. He had never visited her office before. When he walked through the hallway at Fort Liberty, soldiers stepped aside automatically. Emma looked up from paperwork and almost didn't recognize him in that setting. Civilian clothes in a place that belonged to her other life. Captain Laura Bennett raised an eyebrow from outside and quietly shut the door behind him. Daniel looked around the office. Maps, schedules, secure equipment, the world he had resented without fully seeing. Emma stood. "What are you doing here?" He held up a paper coffee cup. "You forgot lunch again." Despite everything, she smiled. "A small one." He noticed, and smiled too. He set the cup down and looked around again. "This is where you disappear to." The sentence could have been accusatory months earlier. Now it sounded almost sad. Emma leaned against the desk. "Most days." Daniel nodded. Then he said something she didn't expect. "I think I hated this place because it took parts of you I couldn't reach." Emma didn't answer immediately. Then she said softly, "I hated home sometimes because I felt like I was failing there." His face shifted. Neither had said those truths so clearly before. Daniel stepped closer. "I don't want you to leave angry." Emma looked down. "I'm not angry." He tilted his head. She met his eyes. "I'm heartbroken." That honesty changed the air between them. He kissed her then, briefly, in the middle of the office where anyone might walk in. It wasn't passion. It was grief mixed with love. When he left, Captain Laura entered a minute later and quietly placed a folder on the desk. Then she looked at Emma and said only, "Don't leave anything unsaid." Emma nodded. The deployment morning came too fast. Daniel drove her to the base before sunrise. The car ride was almost silent. Streetlights slid over the windshield, and both seemed aware they were crossing into something uncertain. At the departure point, soldiers loaded gear while families stood nearby pretending not to count time. Emma turned to Daniel beside the vehicle. He looked like he hadn't slept. Neither had she. He touched her hand. "I don't know what happens next." Emma's throat tightened. "Me neither." He stepped closer, voice low. "But I'm not done trying." Her eyes burned. She nodded once because speaking would have broken her. Then he kissed her forehead. And she boarded. The first month overseas was chaos. Long hours, limited communication, brief windows to call, unreliable internet. Exactly the kind of environment that had broken them before. At first they tried. Messages every day. Calls when possible. Photos, Daniel sending the backyard after rain, Emma sending a blurry sunrise over equipment tents. But distance changed things. Sometimes she missed his calls because of operations. Sometimes he was asleep when she was free. Messages got delayed. Tones got misunderstood. Tiny disappointments returned like old habits waiting for permission. One night, after missing 3 calls because of an emergency inspection, Emma finally connected. Daniel answered immediately. He looked tired. She smiled weakly. "Sorry it ran late." The words came out, and she realized too late. They were the exact words from the first night everything had begun to crack. Daniel heard it too. The pause lasted only 2 seconds. But both felt it. He forced a smile. "It's okay." Emma's stomach sank, because she knew it was. The next weeks worsened. No big fight, just erosion. Missed messages, shorter calls, emotional exhaustion. One Friday, Daniel said he'd call at 9 p.m. her time. He didn't. No text, no explanation. Emma stayed awake until nearly midnight, staring at her screen like an idiot, then hated herself for caring that much. The next morning he texted, "Fell asleep, sorry." That should have been nothing. Instead, it triggered every memory of waiting, of silence, of being left behind emotionally. She didn't reply for 10 hours. Then they fought over text. The worst kind, where every sentence becomes colder because there's no voice to soften it. By the end, neither said, "I love you." That was the first time. 2 months later, Daniel stopped calling daily. Then every other day. Then sometimes just messages. Emma told herself it was normal. But she started checking her phone between briefings, during meals, in the middle of night shifts. The absence became louder than gunfire. Then came the email. Not dramatic, no subject line except "We need to talk honestly." She opened it alone in her quarters after midnight. Daniel wrote that he loved her, that he had tried, that he no longer knew whether love was enough, that every conversation now felt like holding together something already broken. He said he didn't want to punish her, but he also didn't know how to wait while both became strangers. At the end, one line. "I think we may need to accept that we're hurting each other more than helping." Emma read it 3 times, then sat motionless until sunrise. She didn't cry immediately. That happened later, during a supply briefing, while another officer spoke about transport routes, and she suddenly couldn't hear anything. She walked out, sat behind a storage unit where no one could see, and cried into both hands like she was trying to disappear. Captain Laura found her only because she had been deployed to the same rotation and happened to see her leave. Laura sat beside her without speaking. Eventually, Emma handed her the phone. Laura read the email, then quietly returned it. No advice, no speech, just presence. Emma answered Daniel that night. A short message. "When I come home, let's stop deciding by distance. We talk face to face, whatever truth that is." He replied 2 hours later. "Okay." 4 months passed. Then 5. By the time her deployment ended, Emma had stopped imagining what home would feel like. She expected the worst because hope had become painful. When the transport landed back in Charlotte, she walked through arrivals carrying her bag, uniform wrinkled from travel, heart pounding harder than any mission return. And she saw him, Daniel, standing exactly where families waited, hands in pockets, looking just as nervous as she felt. For 1 second, neither moved. Then he stepped forward. Emma dropped her bag, and they met halfway. He hugged her so tightly she almost lost balance. She buried her face against his shoulder and inhaled like she had forgotten how he smelled. Neither said anything for a long time. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel looked at her and smiled sadly. "You came home." The words shattered something inside her. She laughed through tears. "Yeah." He picked up her bag. They drove in silence at first. Not awkward, just full. At the house, everything looked familiar. The porch light on, her mug in the kitchen, their photos still on the wall. Daniel had kept everything. That mattered more than he knew. That evening, they sat on the back porch as the sun disappeared. The same place they once fought over missed weekends. Now there was no anger left, only truth. Daniel spoke first. "I met with a lawyer." Emma's chest tightened. But he continued. "3 months ago, I thought that was where we were going. She looked down. He leaned forward. But I never signed anything. Her eyes met his. He looked tired, honest, vulnerable. I realized I wasn't angry at your job. I was angry that I didn't know how to be close to someone whose life demands so much, and instead of learning, I blamed you. Emma's voice trembled. I blamed you too, for needing things I should have understood. Daniel shook his head. No, you were right. I did make your home feel heavy. Silence settled. Then Emma said the hardest thing of all. I can't promise the army changes. Daniel nodded. I know. I may deploy again. I know. She swallowed. I'm still the same person. He smiled faintly. That's why I'm here. Tears filled her eyes. He reached for her hand. And this time, neither pulled away. They did not magically become perfect after that. Marriage rarely works like stories want it to. They started counseling, real conversations, rules about silence, rules about not weaponizing work or absence, learning how to speak before resentment grew teeth. Some days were good. Some were not. But the difference was this. They stopped fighting to win. They started fighting to understand. A year later, Emma came home from base one rainy evening and found Daniel in the kitchen making pasta badly, as always. He looked up and smiled. The porch light was on. Her bag felt lighter. And as she stepped into the warmth of the house they nearly lost, Emma finally understood something the army had never taught her. Some battles are not won by strength. They are won by staying, speaking, and choosing each other again, especially after you've almost walked away.